Graham Holt almost shot the woman who would save his life without ever firing a bullet. Dawn had only just bled into Cinderbrush Valley when he swung open the henhouse door and found her there, half risen from the straw, a dark shape in the pale gold light. Rags of hay clung to her hair, dust streaked the sharp lines of her cheekbones, and in each hand she clutched an egg, one already cracked and dripping between her fingers. His revolver came up by habit, steady as his breath. Behind her, two small faces glimmered through the warped slats of wood, wide and hollow-eyed. A girl's hand thrown across a little boy's chest, as if her thin arm could stop a bullet. For a long, blistered heartbeat, no one moved. Then the woman lifted her chin, eyes black and unblinking. "I only need two," she said. "For my children, before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Let me know where you're listening from, and thank you for riding along with us." The sun climbed slow and merciless over Cinderbrush Valley, spreading its heat across the world the way a blacksmith spreads fire through steel. The land stretched in every direction, cracked and red, carved by wind and years of neglect. Mesquite roots twisted like scars across the dirt, and the air smelled of iron, dry grass, and the faint sweetness of sagebrush crushed under hooves. Nothing here was gentle. The valley survived by grit alone, and the people who managed to live on it usually matched its temperament. Graham Holt was one of them. He stepped out of the henhouse with the same steadiness he brought into every morning, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, churned earth. From a distance, his cabin stood like an old promise that no one expected him to keep, its gray boards warped by sun, its roofline sagging on the north side, its porch half swallowed by sand and time. A year ago, he had replaced only 2 planks before deciding the rest weren't worth the effort. The silence suited him, and the emptiness asked for nothing he couldn't give. But today, the quiet felt different. The woman he had found in the henhouse, even dirt-streaked and trembling, carried herself like someone who had stood against storms far greater than hunger. She emerged into the light now, her children following closely, their steps soft on the dust. Graham took them in with a single glance, the girl's careful watchfulness, the boy's hesitation, the protective tension in their mother's shoulders. They were strangers in every way a person could be, and yet something about them tugged at the part of Graham he had spent years trying to bury. He motioned them toward the cabin, his voice low. "Come inside, you can eat." The woman hesitated, then nodded once. "My name is Aneiya." The name settled into the air like embers falling into ash soft, but with a heat that lingered. Graham didn't offer his own. Names meant ties, and ties had a habit of costing more than they were worth. Still, when the little girl lifted her face toward him with wide brown eyes, he heard himself say, "I'm Graham," inside the cabin. Shadows clung to cool corners, scented with cedar smoke and dry earth. The watering pot hissed on the stove. Graham sliced what little bread he had left and placed it on the table without ceremony. His movements were measured, almost mechanical. But his mind churned beneath the calm. He hadn't had anyone at his table since Clarissa had walked away from it years ago. Gold earrings catching the light as she said she wouldn't waste her life with a man who couldn't give her the future she deserved. Graham had believed her then. Some part of him still did. Aneiya ate slowly, dividing her portion with precise care between her children before touching a bite herself. She didn't ask for pity or permission. Everything she did was deliberate. The way someone behaves after too many doors had been slammed in their face. Her hair, long and braided down her back, had come loose at the ends, revealing strands the color of burned chestnut. Her eyes flicked up only when necessary, sharp and assessing, never pleading. "You traveled far," Graham said quietly. Aneiya nodded. "Farther than I meant to." Her voice was steady, but exhaustion rippled beneath it. "Why here?" he asked. She looked out the window toward the lone cotton tree in the distance, its bare branches stark against the sky. The land felt quiet. I hoped quiet meant safe. Graham followed her gaze. He knew what it meant to come to this valley hoping for safety, only to find yourself alone with everything you'd tried to forget. That tree, the old cotton sentinel, had once bloomed like snow against summer sky, back when he'd believed life had more to offer him than labor and silence. He cleared his throat. "You and the children can stay for now, just until you get your bearings." Aneiya bowed her head slightly, though her spine remained straight. "We don't need much, just time." Graham looked at the thin boy, now dozing against his sister's side. "Time. I've got." He didn't notice, at least not consciously, how the valley felt less hollow with 3 more breaths moving inside his walls. But something in the air shifted, all the same quiet, fragile, like the first sign a dead root might still reach for spring. The first real silence between them settled not inside the henhouse, but in the dim kitchen where the smell of warm bread mingled with dust and old timber. Aneiya finished dividing the last piece of crust between her children, then sat back with her hands knotted loosely in her lap. She did not eat again. Graham noticed. He also noticed the way she angled her body so the doorway remained in her line of sight, a habit born from too many nights of running. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her in the way a man watches a wildfire, far off, close enough to worry, too far to understand. "You planning to head west?" he asked. Aneiya shook her head. "There is nothing west of here for us." Her voice was gentle, but carried a blade in its quietness. Graham lifted a brow. "And east." She paused before answering, eyes drifting toward the children. Kiona was tracing circles in the dust on the table with one thin finger. Talek leaned into her shoulder, fighting sleep. "East is only memory," Aneiya murmured, "and memory is a dangerous place for someone like me." He didn't press her. A man who carried his own history like a wound understood what it meant when someone guarded theirs like a shield. Still, something in her tone lodged beneath his ribs, a reminder that people didn't end up in Cinderbrush Valley unless they'd run out of safer ground. Outside, wind brushed against the window, rattling the loose latch. It startled Talek awake. The boy blinked toward Graham with wide eyes, curious, unsure. Graham had seen looks like that before, on colts taken from danger too young. He softened his stance without thinking, relaxing his shoulders. "It's just the valley talking," he said. "Wind carries farther here." The boy didn't answer, but he didn't hide either. That was something. Aneiya noticed the shift, her gaze flicking between Graham and her son. She straightened slightly. "We won't trouble you long," she said. "You're not troubling me." The words left Graham faster than he meant them to. Aneiya's brows lifted only a small movement, but enough to reveal she had not expected kindness from him. Perhaps not from any white man. He rubbed a thumb against the wooden counter, suddenly aware of the thickness in the air between them. "You took a risk coming into my yard." he said quietly. Aneiya met his eyes. Her expression did not harden, but it did not soften either. "I take risks every day," she replied. "But I do not take them blindly. You didn't shoot." Graham's jaw tightened. "Most men would have. I know." There was no bitterness in her voice, only tired fact. That answer landed deeper than she realized. It pushed Graham into a place he rarely let himself go, where memories of Clarissa's cold departure lurked alongside the echo of cavalry commands he wished he had never obeyed. The valley wasn't the only thing that held ghosts. He exhaled slowly. "I'm not most men." Aneiya held his gaze for the first time without flinching. The children breathed softly beside her. For a moment, the room felt oddly balanced, like two storms facing each other with equal force, neither ready to retreat nor collide. The door creaked then, breaking the tension as Thaddeus Creel stepped inside without knocking. The old man smelled of horse sweat and tobacco, a walking bundle of dust wrapped in worn leather. His gray brows rose as he took in the scene, Graham rigid by the counter. Aneiya poised but alert. Two tired children, and a silence thicker than uncut rope. "Well now," Creel drawled, tapping his hat against his thigh. "If this ain't the quietest standoff I've walked into since the war." Graham shot him a warning look. Creel ignored it, eyes slipping toward Aneiya with a gentleness most wouldn't expect from a man carved out of sandstone. "Ma'am," he said with a respectful nod, "these parts don't see many who carry themselves as steady as you do. Valley must have had a reason for pushing you toward this place." Aneiya dipped her head, uncertain. Creel turned to Graham next, and the faint smirk that crossed the old man's face made Graham feel like a boy caught doing something suspicious. "Don't let the wind take something worthwhile before you know what it is," Creel remarked. Graham's jaw worked. Aneiya's eyes narrowed slightly, confused, but neither spoke. Outside, the valley wind rose again, stronger this time, brushing sand against the windows like a whispered warning that the world was shifting, even if none of them were ready to admit it. The days that followed unfolded with the slow certainty of desert dawns, each one peeling back a new layer neither Graham nor Aneiya had meant to reveal. The valley, harsh as it was, had a way of pressing people together, not with gentleness, but with necessity. And necessity had always been the first crack where trust could seep through. Aneiya rose early every morning, slipping out of the cabin with Kiona and Talek before the heat settled. She moved across the yard with quiet purpose, her braids swinging against her back, her steps sure even on uneven ground. Graham watched her sometimes from the porch as she knelt in the fading garden, fingers working the stubborn, dry soil as if trying to coax memory from it. She touched the earth like an old friend who needed convincing to speak again. One morning, he approached with a shovel over his shoulder. "Soil's been dead for years," he said. "Ain't much point fighting it." Aneiya didn't look at him. "Dead things can wake if hands are patient," she murmured. "They only need someone willing to try." Something in her tone made him shift his stance. She wasn't talking about soil alone. He knew it. She didn't press him, though, merely continued turning the dirt with steady, rhythmic movements. Graham ended up dropping to his knees beside her, shovel sinking into the earth. They worked in silence, broken only by the scrape of metal and the soft whistle of wind through mesquite. Kiona gathered rocks into neat little lines bordering the rows. Talek chased a grasshopper with the single-minded joy only children possessed. Graham found himself paying attention when the boy laughed sharp. Unexpected. It startled something in him awake. Later that afternoon, Aneiya washed the children's clothes near the well, while Graham repaired a fence post nearby. Sweat slid down his spine in the dry heat. He swung the hammer with the confidence of a man who had worked with his hands all his life. But a sharp thorn from a broken mesquite branch sliced his arm. The pain hit fast and bright. Aneiya was at his side before he had time to curse properly. "You're bleeding," she said, voice soft but firm. Her fingers circled his wrist, guiding his arm toward the shade. Her touch was warm, steady, certain. Graham froze. No one had touched him in years. Not since Clarissa's hands had slipped away from him with more coldness than apology. "It's nothing," he muttered. Aneiya ignored him, tearing a strip from her shawl with practiced ease. "Hold still." She pressed the cloth to his skin, her thumb brushing the edge of the wound. A quiet line of concentration appeared between her brows as she tied the fabric securely. Graham stared at her hands, at the way they moved without hesitation. "You've done this before," he said. Her eyes flickered. "I've learned to fix what I can. When you run, you don't always have a choice." He wanted to ask what she had run from, who had hurt her, who had taken away the life she once had, but her gaze drifted to her children, Talek now pulling Kiona toward the well, and the question dissolved. The story was there, in the way she guarded them, in the lines drawn tight around her mouth whenever a stranger's shadow crossed her thoughts. That night, the valley cooled under a faded moon. Graham sat on the porch, boots crossed, polishing his old revolver out of habit rather than need. From the fire pit, he heard a low melody drift through the stillness. Aneiya sat mending a torn shirt, humming an Apache lullaby that rose and fell like wind, carrying secrets over canyon walls. The sound threaded through the night, gentle but weighted with memories. He approached slowly, stopping a few steps away. "That song, you always hum it in the evenings." Aneiya looked up. Firelight flickered across her face, softening her features. "It's for them," she said, "so they remember where they come from, even when the land forgets us." Graham swallowed. "Do you remember?" A shadow passed through her gaze. "Every day." She lowered her eyes to the shirt. "Some memories we keep even when we wish we couldn't." There it was, that quiet wall she carried, the one built with grief and duty. He recognized it because he had one too, made from different pieces but just as heavy. He sat down on the opposite side of the fire, not close enough to crowd her, but near enough that the silence stretched between them like a thin thread waiting to be pulled. Thaddeus Creel visited the next afternoon, riding his old mule with the tired dignity of a man older than the desert itself. He leaned on his saddle horn, eyes glinting as he took in the sight, Graham adjusting a water bucket while Kiona chattered beside him, her small hand gripping his sleeve. Talek perched on a fence rail, Aneiya watching all three with a softness she didn't even realize had surfaced. Creel chuckled. "Never thought I'd see this place with footprints smaller than a horse's." Graham scowled. "Don't start, I'm just saying," Creel replied, swinging down from the mule. "Quiet men make good fathers. They don't rush things. They don't run." His gaze flicked meaningfully toward Aneiya. "And women who've lost too much, they know how to stay when it matters." Aneia's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. Graham noticed. Creel tipped his hat. "Just an old man observing the weather," he said before walking to the well for a drink. By dusk, the children were asleep, curled together on the single straw mattress Graham had emptied his spare blankets for. Aneiya stood in the doorway, watching them breathe in small, even rhythms. Graham approached quietly. "They trust you," he said. Aneiya kept her eyes on her children. Children feel truth faster than adults. They know who means harm and who doesn't. Her words were simple, but something unspoken lingered beneath them. Graham stepped beside her, close enough for their shoulders to almost touch. "And you," he murmured, for the first time. She looked up at him not with guarded caution, but with a softness that unsettled them both. "I am learning," she said. Outside, the wind shifted through the valley, warm, steady, like a breath released after too many years held tight. And though neither of them said it aloud, the space between them was no longer distance. It was possibility. The air turned strange before sundown, the way the sky sometimes tightens before a storm that never comes. Graham felt it in the stillness of the yard, in the way even the chickens grew quiet, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. He had just finished securing the east fence when he spotted a dust trail sweeping down from Redwater Crossing, thin at first, then thickening, splitting into several shapes. Riders, not the kind who came for water or conversation. Graham's jaw tightened. "Aneiya," he called, voice low but firm. "Inside. Now." She emerged from the cabin with Kiona and Talek close behind, her body already angling to shield them. One look at the horizon and her breath stilled. She'd seen men like that before, men who rode with fire instead of reason. The first horseman reached the gate, dust rolling off him like smoke. Burl Kinney swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the dirt with drunken confidence. Behind him were Dax Rimmer and Harlan Stokes, along with two others Graham did not know, all with the swagger of men who believed trouble was theirs to hand out. Well, Burl drawled, yanking off his gloves. "Heard you're keeping company. That ain't exactly welcome in these parts." "Holt." Graham stepped forward, placing himself squarely between them and the cabin. His voice remained steady. "Turn around. You're not coming any farther." Dax spat into the dust. "We ain't here to chat. Folks in town say you got yourself an Apache woman hiding out here along with her pups." Aneiya stiffened. Talek clung to her leg. Kiona's small hands tightened into fists. Graham felt something old and sharp rise in his chest. "You're not touching them." Harlan smirked, torch still unlit in his hand. "Ain't up to you. We're setting things right. Can't have savages nesting close to town. Next thing you know, there'll be more of them." Graham's fingers curled around the stock of his rifle. "They're under my roof," he said. "And they're not going anywhere," Burl laughed. "Is that right? You gonna stand up for that woman and her brats? They ain't yours." Graham's voice dropped to something darker, more certain than he knew he had. "They're mine to protect. That's enough." The men froze, not because they believed him, but because something in the way he said it stripped the night of any doubt. Even the wind seemed to pause. Burl recovered first, stepping forward. "Move aside." "Holt, we ain't asking again." He reached for Graham's shoulder. Graham struck before the thought could interfere. The butt of his rifle cracked against Burl's jaw, sending the man sprawling into the dirt. Torches clattered, horses reared, dust exploded upward. Dax lunged next. But Graham leveled the rifle at his chest, not firing, just holding the line with a calm that was more threatening than violence. "Don't," Graham warned, behind him. Aneiya whispered something in Apache, half fear, half prayer. Kiona pressed into her side. Talek buried his face against her hip. Burl staggered to his feet. wiping blood from his lip, eyes burning with humiliation. "You're gonna regret that. Holt!" Before he could step forward again. Another voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Thaddeus Creel approached from the darkening trail, lanterns swinging from his hand like a small captured moon. And behind him came 3 men from the outskirts, quiet men. Decent men drawn not by rumor, but by Creel's word. "We ain't letting this valley turn to rot," Creel said, voice steady as an anvil. "You boys go home before you make fools of yourselves." Burl spat blood. "You taking their side?" Creel's eyes hardened. "I'm taking the side that ain't built on cowardice." The insult landed hard. No one moved. Then the riders, one by one, began to back away, first with curses under their breath, then with muttered threats, until the night swallowed them completely. The dust settled slowly, falling like ash. Graham didn't lower the rifle until the last hoofbeat faded. Only then did he turn toward the cabin. Aneiya stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around her children, her breath trembling. When Graham stepped closer, her eyes met his with a force that felt like a hand closing around his heart. "You didn't have to fight for us," she whispered. Graham shook his head. "I didn't fight for you." He took one more step, voice steady but raw. "I fought because you're family, whether I deserve it or not." Aneiya's lips parted, a soft exhale escaping her, a sound caught somewhere between disbelief and recognition. For the first time, her guard cracked wide enough for something bright, fragile, and dangerous to slip through. Behind them, the valley, once hard as bone, felt different, as if the wind itself had just chosen which side it would stand on. Night settled heavily over Cinderbrush Valley, the kind of night that felt deeper after violence, as if the land itself needed time to breathe again. The torches had long been extinguished, hoofprints half-smoothed by wind, but the echo of danger still hung in the air like the aftertaste of smoke. Graham closed the cabin door behind them and set the rifle aside. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the sharp realization of what he had almost lost. Aneiya stood near the hearth, her children asleep on the mattress she'd pulled close to the warm stones. The fire painted her profile in gold and shadow-strong cheekbones, tired eyes, a mouth caught somewhere between gratitude and uncertainty. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was different now, charged with something rawer than caution, softer than fear. "You could have killed them," she finally said. Her voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Graham exhaled slowly. "Would have been easy." He sank into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on the flames. "But I've done enough killing. I'm not that man anymore." Aneiya studied him. "Then who are you?" Graham had no quick answer. His chest tightened, as if the words he hadn't spoken in years were pushing upward, demanding to be freed. "My wife Clarissa left because we couldn't have children," he said, each word edged with old hurt. Or she said we couldn't. Maybe she meant I wasn't enough. I don't know. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, eyes flickering. I stopped trying after that. Stopped believing I had anything worth giving a family. Aneiya's brows drew together, not in pity, but in understanding. "You think you failed her?" He nodded once, a hard motion. "And I didn't want to fail anyone else, so I stayed alone. Easier that way." Aneiya let the firelight warm her hands. "When my husband died, I ran. Not because I wanted to, because the world gave me no other path. Every step since has felt like a debt I can't repay. Every breath was for them, my children, not for me. Her voice trembled just once. I never allowed myself to want anything again. Wanting is dangerous. Graham lifted his gaze. Her eyes were dark reflections of the flames, deep, determined, and wounded in ways he recognized too well. You're not running anymore, he said softly. Aneiya blinked, the faintest waver crossing her face. Maybe not. Maybe I am tired of running. The fire cracked, sending a curl of smoke upward. Graham leaned forward, voice low. When I stood outside tonight, when those men came, I realized something. He swallowed. I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid for you, for the children. I would have stood there against 10 more of them if I had to. Aneiya's breath caught. Why? It wasn't a challenge. It was a plea for truth. Graham answered without hesitation. Because you're not guests here. You're home. Aneiya closed her eyes for a heartbeat. And when she opened them again, something in her had unclenched. Not entirely, but enough. She stepped closer, stopping just an arm's length away. Then let me say something you may not be ready to hear. She drew in a breath. My children. They look at you the way they once looked at their father. With trust. With hope. Graham's voice was barely above a whisper. And you? Aneiya's answer came soft, steady, and true. I am learning to do the same. Outside. The valley wind softened, brushing against the cabin walls like a long, relieved sigh, 2 broken lives beginning, at last, to lean toward each other. Spring crept into Cinderbrush Valley the way hope often does, quietly at first. Then all at once. The hard red earth softened. Wind lost its bite. And one morning, when the sun slipped over the ridge, the old cotton sentinel stood dusted with the first white blossoms it had shown in years. They clung to dry branches like little pieces of forgiveness, stubborn and soft. Aneiya stood beneath the tree, her newborn daughter nestled against her chest, sleeping with the delicate breaths of someone untouched by the world's cruelties. Kiona and Talek played near the creek, chasing drifting cotton tufts as if they were snow. Graham watched from a few paces back, a hand resting on the fence he had fixed months ago, the same fence he once thought wasn't worth repairing. Now, he couldn't imagine the homestead without their laughter threading through it. He stepped closer, touching one of the blossoms overhead. Didn't think this old tree had it in her anymore, he murmured. Aneiya glanced at him, an unspoken warmth in her eyes. Even wounded things bloom if someone tends them. Graham let the words settle between them. For the first time, they didn't sting with memory, they rested gently, like a truth finally earned. But peace in the valley was rarely undisturbed. Late that afternoon, a polished carriage rolled down Sparrow Ridge Trail, the dust swirling around its wheels like a second shadow. Graham stiffened as a familiar figure stepped out, Clarissa Vane, dressed in silk, the color of fading lavender, eyes scanning the yard with practiced longing. I heard you were alone out here, she said, her voice smooth as ever. I thought we might talk. Aneiya's hand tightened protectively around the baby. Graham didn't move toward Clarissa. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document creased, worn, but final. You made your choice years ago, he said, handing it to her without accusation. And so did I. Clarissa's gaze flicked to Aneiya, to the children, to the blooming cotton tree swaying gently above them. Whatever she had hoped to find in Graham's eyes was no longer there. With a stiff nod, she returned to the carriage. Wheels turned. Dust swallowed the last trace of her, when silence returned. Graham looked at Aneiya. The weight of his past released like a stone dropped into deep water. "This is where I'm meant to be," he said simply. Aneiya stepped beside him beneath the blooming branches. The wind stirred the cotton blossoms, sending them drifting around their feet in pale, quiet spirals like snow, like blessings, like all the things broken hearts still dared to hope for. And from that spring onward, no one called it Holt Homestead anymore. They called it the wind that stayed.